hand over to our moderator for the night, Keith, to take over. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Aaron. By way of introduction, my name is Keith Jernigan. I am currently an underwriting assistant at Fidelis Underwriting Limited, supporting the North American and International Property Treaty and DNF teams respectively. So I'm very privileged to be here today in front of you all. I'd actually like to start off this event by extending my appreciation for everything the ACIN does and will continue to do, not only within the London insurance marketplace, but also the wider insurance industry, setting the example, but more importantly, serving as the impetus of change that we're all here today to discuss. So we have some very interesting and relevant topics to get into shortly. But first, please join me in welcoming our stellar panel that we have here with us today to further discuss the role diversity and inclusion will play in the future of the insurance industry. So first up, we have Shireen Scott. Shireen is a senior internal auditor providing assurance in areas such as investments, operations, and line of businesses operating in Europe, Middle East, and Asia. She's also very passionate about promoting diversity and inclusion within the insurance marketplace, whilst uplifting those from underrepresented backgrounds. So a very warm welcome to Shireen. Next up, we have Pauline Miller. Pauline is currently the head of culture for Lloyd's and is responsible for leading the strategic and operational delivery of the culture agenda across the corporation and the wider London Lloyd's marketplace. She joins us with extensive experience, having led and implemented numerous global projects, including employee engagement, consultancy skills for HR, building inclusive cultures, and most recently, leadership development, having led the talent development and inclusion function at Lloyd's. So another very warm welcome to Pauline. We then have James Shepard. James is the current head of human resources at Tokyo Marine Kiln and set up the firm's inclusion and diversity strategy in early 2020. James spent the last decade in leadership roles throughout human resources in both the insurance and engineering sectors. And I know James has been doing some great work in the realm of data capture in terms of D&I. So hopefully we'll get to hear from him in that regard a bit later. And then lastly, we're joined by Isla Bayi as head of inclusive diversity and executive vice president of human resources at Sampo International. Isla is also very passionate about working with the business in order to create a culture and environment where everyone from any background can belong and do their best work in. So again, another warm welcome to all of our panelists today. Myself and the audience are certainly in for a treat with the level of expertise and experience that we have here with us at our disposal. But not only that fact, but the fact that that level of expertise and experience is willing to engage in this ever topical discussion. So very fortunate in that regard. For the audience, if at any time during the discussion you have a burning question for either myself or one of our lovely panelists, please do utilize the Zoom chat feature and we will allocate some time at the end to address anything outstanding. So with that said, let's dive straight into our first topic. As a holistic network, the ACIN is always seeking innovative thought in order to further enrich their membership pool and sponsors alike in the areas of recruitment, corporate culture, education, but also the importance of gathering accurate ethnic data. We all know corporate industrial ambitions draw inspiration from creative recruitment techniques. So to kick off our segment of recruitment, Isla, if we can hear from you initially on how do we go about attracting more diverse talent?
Okay, so hello everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me to be here. It's a pleasure. So I think that, we would all certainly agree, attracting and retaining diverse talent is crucial for the industry. Sourcing and selection has been in the past very heavily weighted towards the traditional pathways. I think we've all seen the family and friend referrals, the focusing on specific sources, specific schools, universities, recruitment agencies that provide very cookie cutter candidates. I think in order to be successful now and in the future, we need to make a real effort here, but make that real effort as part of a larger commitment to inclusive diversity in general and specifically improving representation of diverse talent at all levels of the organization. I'm glad to see many companies in the industry are focusing specifically on diversity sourcing and selection strategies, both informally and formally, as they work towards enhancing practice in this area. I think from my perspective so far, to really make sustainable change here, I think you have to focus on both behavioral and structural inclusion aspects. So by behavioral, I mean, focus on developing an inclusive mindset, inclusive decisions, inclusive actions, and working towards that culture of belonging, both on an individual employee basis and a collective company basis. So to me, that means increasing our inclusive diversity competence and awareness of our leaders and our hiring managers, and supporting them in the journey of being open to and actively seeking out diverse talent pools, and helping them understand the common hiring biases that we see so frequently today.
I think that's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for that, Isla. James, would you also like to provide your perspective on how we can attract a more diverse talent pool within the industry?
Thanks, Keith. And yeah, it's great to be here. And I completely echo what Isla's just said. It's really unfortunate that we don't seem to be moving the dial significantly in the makeup of our organisations, despite the insurance sector focusing on inclusion and diversity for quite some time now. And I think we really need to step back and look at, when we're setting out the requirements for each position, do we really need 5 years experience in XYZ skill? Or do we need 3 years experience in the insurance sector? And focusing on some of those kind of attitude or behavioural aspects that are really important, and thinking what can be learned or what can be transferred in from other companies, from other sectors. And I think we need to start thinking about recruiting much more from outside of the insurance industry, where there is that greater diversity, not just from an ethnicity or a gender perspective, but also diversity of thought, creativity, and challenges that perhaps people in this sector haven't faced, because people have got different backgrounds. So really going back to the requirements of each role and thinking, is this absolutely essential, and can we actually broaden out the scope of the role by hiring someone completely different?
Absolutely, yeah. It's a joint effort across multiple functions, but appreciate that, James. And naturally, once that talent has been sourced, Pauline, if we can hear from you on how can companies develop recruitment policies in order to make sure that they are being more inclusive?
I think when you consider the question, I think we have to ask ourselves very clearly how serious we are about attracting talent, recruiting the talent, and then, as we'll come to later, retaining that talent in our organisation. There is no point in going out and attracting them if they're not going to make it through the recruitment process. And there's no point in recruiting them if we then don't want to retain them. It is expensive. And to be honest, it isn't a great experience for anyone, time consuming, etc. But certainly if we're thinking about our recruitment practices, we need to be very clear that we look at things like how we design the job descriptions. To James's point, do we need years of experience? Are we using language that turns people away from us in terms of the way that we describe the types of experiences and the skills and the competencies that we're looking for? So let's be very clear about job design, because that's really important. In addition to that, we need to think about the actual recruitment process. So when we think about policies, it's more about the processes. What's the point that people make decisions, and how can we make sure that the process of applying and going through a recruitment process is very clear? So interviews, who's in the interview process? Have you considered a diverse group of interviewers? Are you considering the types of questions? Is it structured and objective, or is it subjective in the way that they ask those questions? Are they the same throughout? As if you use assessment centres, are you using types of scenarios that will disadvantage certain particular groups if they don't have exposure and knowledge of the industry? And then I'll finish off by saying the other really most important piece, and one that we have done quite firmly at Lloyd's for a number of years, is training for those in the hiring process. So we go through a process of accredited training for our managers and recruiters and anyone that's included in recruiting, and it is a mandatory requirement that in the process there should always be an accredited individual for recruitment purposes, and that's where we have trained them on designing the job description, competency-based interviewing, etc. And finally, I'd suggest that to ensure that recruitment policies are having the desired effect, that it goes back to the data point that James will talk to later, but you must be able to track those in the recruitment process. Sorry,
Absolutely.
through that really quickly.
No, I appreciate your candidness, Pauline. And naturally, we saw an uptick in support for the Black Lives Matter movement, and post the early summer murder of George Floyd in public, we saw a lot of companies providing public support and providing some nice narrative per se around what they're going to do to attack their own diversity and inclusion metrics. But oftentimes strong narrative might not be met with tangible action. So I guess, James, if we can come to you initially on what is your organization doing to encourage diverse hiring, but also how are they holding themselves accountable on this delivery?
Yeah, and I'd like to talk about unconscious bias training for a while, because it's something that's got a very bad rep recently. I remember reading an article in the last few weeks, I think it's the BBC, where the civil service have scrapped all unconscious bias training. And I think actually there's still a place for bias training, and there's still a place for ensuring that people are aware of biases throughout the process. I think it's just the way you deliver the training is really important. So we don't offer kind of standard bias training for every single person in the business, where you train them for an hour, you talk to them about biases, and that's it. We look at certain processes within the business. So from a recruitment process, we'll sit down with the manager at the start of the process, and we'll have an open conversation about things like biases and where they might play out in the process, whether you're reading CVs or whether you're interviewing or assessing someone. And it's a really open conversation. And you start to kind of get some really good feedback from the individual, say, oh, I just wasn't aware of that. And rather than kind of wagging the finger and saying, well, you're wrong because you've got biases, because we've all got biases, we're all human. It's more of an open conversation about just be aware of them and use that kind of stop and challenge process where when you make a decision, make sure it's based on objective facts. And it's going back to things that Pauline was saying, making sure you've got people on the interview panel who are going to challenge each other, that are from different backgrounds. And when you're making a decision, make it on objective information. So you're asking candidates the same questions, you're scoring people, maybe you're using some form of exercise alongside an interview. So you're not just basing it on whether you get a good feel from someone in an interview, you've got much more rounded kind of data and information to make that decision.
I think that's brilliant, James. We actually have a segment, or rather a series of questions directed towards addressing individual biases a bit later on, but I think you hit the nail right on the head there. Isla, would you also like to comment on what your organization is doing to hold itself accountable in regards to encouraging more diverse hiring?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is part of what Sompo International is focusing on, quite profoundly at the moment. It's part of a larger focus on inclusive diversity, and it's going into that behavioral and structural inclusion I mentioned before. So, from a recruitment perspective specifically, we are looking at a foundational learning and competence awareness raising program, starting top down. So all of our leaders are going, a number of which are hiring managers, are going through quite an intensive inclusive leadership development program. And then we'll start to filter that down the organization to all people managers and then to individual contributors. The aim of which is just raising the awareness levels. And as James mentioned, enhancing the conversation. So the unconscious bias training, of course, has a place, but its real value is having the conversation and people being very interested and open to challenging their own biases and that they're challenging themselves in the process. What we're also doing as part of a larger full review of all our talent management processes and procedures is looking at sourcing and selection, challenging the status quo, engaging with different demographic groups to make sure that we're looking at what we're doing and evolving our policies and procedures in all areas, and specifically in recruitment, to try and get to where we want to be as an organization. And we're establishing KPIs and a diversity scorecard that we can track progress in this area from an organizational global perspective.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's all about being able to track that progress and benchmark where you are at a certain point in time. And I think we can all agree that recruitment techniques have traditionally been viewed as idiosyncratic proprietary strategy. Hopefully these and further discussions of this nature can begin to de-brick that foundation and usher in a new era of cohesive and industrial best practice. This era, however, will not prosper without further insight into what drives recruitment initiatives in the first place, what employers look for, but importantly, why they look for these characteristics in particular. So culture plays a pivotal role in any entity's eventual success or failure, of which we've already established begins with inclusive recruitment. But to kick off our next segment of culture, we can hear from Shireen initially on what can companies do to create a culture of inclusion?
First of all, I think that they need to look at their employees as people, not statistics, especially when it's very, very big companies. It's very easy to look at everyone as a statistic, and that's when things can falter. I also think it's really important that they try not to group cultures and ethnicities. I think that once you do that, you lose, again, the different experiences that everyone goes through that is going to be completely different to each other's, and really lose the opportunity to understand what it is that your people, for example, could be employees or need. So that's the first thing. And then I think leadership also need to be quite empathetic as well, and try and not always look at something from a business orientated perspective, and maybe more of an emotional perspective. And that's really, really important. And by connecting with people on a more emotional perspective can allow them to understand what it is that people need, and what it is that they can do to make the environment that people are working in a lot more inclusive.
Thank you for that, Shireen. Pauline, would you also like to follow up with your perspective on what companies can do to create a culture of inclusion?
Yeah, so I think the very first thing you have to do is you have to listen. And you have to listen to your colleagues. You have to understand.
Oh no, did we lose Pauline? Oh, pandemic,
Yeah, I
IT
think so.
issues strike again. No worries at all. Hopefully we'll get Pauline back here shortly. But in the interest of time, if we could hear from Shireen once again. Obviously, once this culture of inclusion has been addressed, it obviously comes down to your own inherent perceived experiences of that culture. So I guess if we can get some commentary on what has been your experience of culture thus far within the industry.
The first thing you realize when you work in the insurance industry is that it's one pretty much very heavy male dominated, and you also realize that the culture is fostered from very, very, very far back. It's a very, very traditional industry, which is, I think, very interesting. It makes the insurance what it is, but it makes it hard to change, I think. And so my experience at the beginning was very different to what it is now. You know, even if I think about how many more people from all different types of race, but mostly ethnic minorities who I've seen joining the insurance industry recently has been amazing. I'm definitely seeing, you know, platforms such as ACIN trying to push for that as well, which again, I think is fantastic. I have seen a slight uptick from just talking to friends as well, about trying to make the insurance industry multi-generational as well, because obviously we talk about the insurance industry from the perspective of you know, whether it be ethnicities or even gender, but also about generation is just as important. You know, there's definitely a decline in the amount of students that are interested in joining the insurance industry. So for me, my experience is completely different from what it was before to now, and I hope to see it still increasing in a positive way.
Absolutely. I mean, I joined the industry a little over 2 years ago, and nearly that entire time I've been involved with the ACIN, and I've seen firsthand how it's slowly starting to change. We have seen some progress, but there certainly is some areas of improvement that can be addressed. Isla, would you also like to describe what has been your experience with culture within the industry thus far?
I think what I would say is it's changing. I think that the it's been much more rapid change, I think, in the past couple of years. I mean, I think I started in the industry over 15 years ago. And in different locations, so worked in the UK in the industry, in Ireland, in Bermuda, and each has its own different influences and factors. But specifically in the UK and especially the London market, you know, as Shireen said, a very traditional marketplace. But what I'm sensing is an energy and a momentum for change, which I'm optimistic about. You know, I think you looking at the Lloyd's Culture Survey results. You know, it's evidence that change can happen when people are focused on it and are open to the conversation. So I think I would say it's evolving.
I think that's spot on as well. I mean, just speaking of the culture survey that the Lloyd just conducted this year or this past year, which I'm sure you played a part of, Pauline. So welcome back. Glad we were able to sort out your IT. But the survey in itself found that only 46% of Black people working within London believe in senior leaders' ability to create opportunity for everyone, as opposed to 74% of all respondents. And I believe that ties into what we've already discussed in the realm of accountability and people's ambition to say the right things, but not necessarily put tangible action behind it. So obviously that narrative comes with its own challenges and hurdles as well. So if we can hear from James initially on what challenges do you think face the industry when it comes to changing culture?
I think that one of the biggest challenges is that I think in some organizations, leaders still don't see the intrinsic link between culture and strategy. And the two really go hand in hand. And I think there are some organizations where leaders still see that as the fluffy stuff. You know, it's not going to help us, you know, get the numbers up, and we need to focus on transacting business. Yeah, the two really need to go hand in hand. And we're so lucky at TMK to have the CEO, Brad Irick, who puts people and culture at the heart of everything that we do. It is the #1 priority of all of our strategic priorities. And it's ingrained into kind of everything that we do. And our CFO keeps saying this, but culture does eat strategy for breakfast. You know, and if you don't have you know, the right culture, then you can talk about strategy and you can do everything that you do, but people will see through it, and actions are much stronger than words. So they really do need to be ingrained together.
Appreciate that insight, James. And now that we have Pauline back, I think it would be great to close out this segment of culture with what you feel like companies are challenged with in regards to changing their own culture.
Sure. So I think there's a couple of different things. So one of the things I was going to say is it's really important to decouple culture from inclusion and diversity in some way. So so culture is an enabler of having greater inclusion. And the way that we look at culture is if you consider your culture is everything that you see, say, hear, do, how you make decisions, how you interact with people, how you work together. When you consider all of those elements of culture, and then how does that play out in the organization? Is it through your artifacts? Is it through certain beliefs and behaviors that, and those stories that people just believe have to happen? If you consider all of those elements and then start to think about how does that then challenge or create it more different? How does that create an experience for me as a Black woman or somebody else who has a disability or otherwise? Then you can start to see how culture impacts your ability to attract and recruit diverse talent and then retain them. So what firms need to be able to do is to start off by understanding what their culture looks like. And you have to use lots of different insight points. So consider things like your engagement survey, but also consider things like what's your level of reporting of issues around grievances. There should be some. Don't be scared of them, because we're not perfect as organisations. So there should be areas, and how are they dealt with? talk to your colleagues. We've just done a whole piece of work on lived experiences of our Black and minority ethnic colleagues. And that has really given us some insights in the corporation around what the experience looks like for that particular group of individuals, and then what can we do to address that. And then if you really want to move the dial, and this was as I dropped out and came back, but this was part of that conversation. I think both Isla and James probably both referred to this, but how you make it accountable for your leaders. And so you can measure and monitor, but if it's not part of their KPIs, if it's not part of how they are rewarded individually and how they are measured for performance, you won't shift the dial, because nobody's got any skin in the game. And you really need to them to recognise that this is as equal, as James was just saying, as equal to strategy. And for the last 18 months or so in Lloyd's, we've been talking about culture alongside our strategy and alongside our performance. So those are the, so for us, it's been an equal pillar. It's a strategic imperative for the work that we're doing. And you've got to be able to measure your leaders and then filter that through the organisation, hold them accountable.
I think that's great, and I think you touched on a great point in regards to grievances and having your own employee or your own colleagues be comfortable bringing grievances up to the forefront of conversation. Because if you're not, then you need to question your own culture, whether they're comfortable bringing that or discussing that in the first place. So I think that's all very insightful. So appreciate all of your input there. The benefits of a diverse and inclusive workforce continually prove to be more than worth the investment. Any investment in recruitment and culture will not sustain said benefits without continuous and simultaneous investment in the realm of education. So to kick off the topic of education, if we can come straight back to Pauline, now that we got to make the most of you. What is the current state of diversity education within the market, and what more needs to be done in order to achieve better results?
Well, I think we can be honest. In the market, it's not great. It's as fairly as simple as that. And why is it not great? Because what we haven't done is thought about how we create the right type of training for different situations and for different people. So if we're talking about, earlier you spoke about the all of the companies that have sort of put either messages out since the murder of George Floyd or otherwise, and actually, so have we looked at, and for some firms, absolutely real support. TMK, Sompo have all done some great things around racial literacy and racial fluency for their people. But is that across the market? No, it's not. So when we think about it at a market level, we're not fully there yet. I think we've got some really great examples of firms within the market that are really trying to create the right educational tools for their leaders, tools for managers, tools for individual peers, tools to think about how you challenge if you see something. So whether that's being an active bystander, there are different types of education that we need. And we also need to encourage people to self-educate, because it cannot be the sole responsibility of the organisation to educate their staff. Cannot be. We cannot put it on a plate and say, here you go, here's some e-learning, educate. We've given you the education and you've got all the tools. It has to be consistent, and realistically, and looking at some of the recent case law, you really want to ensure that training that you are doing specifically around equality, diversity, discrimination, etc., really you should be thinking about it on an annual basis.
Absolutely. If we could hear from Shireen as well on what you feel like needs to be done in order to achieve better results.
So it's funny because I was just thinking about what Pauline said in terms of the need for people to teach themselves as well. And so I think that the best thing for companies to do is actually to not be the ones doing the discussion, but actually the ones doing the action, and just putting in the work to actually show the representation that is needed. So some of the things that I would maybe say is recognizing the sorts of holidays that are important to people's cultures. and the ethnicities that are out there, and making sure they have the right to take the time off that they need, and making sure that everyone else is informed about this. So you're also educating at the same time. But again, it comes with the action. Again, like I said, I'm very passionate about the need for multi-generational diversity within the insurance industry. So I think a lot of companies need to be investing a lot more money into taking on more graduates. I don't really know of many insurance companies that take on maybe 20 or 30 graduates in 1 year. That's maybe the max I've heard. I think there needs to be a big push, because the insurance industry is definitely, it's definitely missed by students. They really don't know enough about it, and they don't understand how much of a good industry and lucrative industry it can be for their career trajectory. So I think a lot more needs to be done for graduates, and also to take on apprentices as well. Like, again, I just don't think enough is being done. And by bringing in people from the bottom that will make their way up, I think that will also educate people who are maybe already at the top about being able to think differently. You know, diversity of thought is so important. If you have everyone from the same generation, it's not going to be there. And I think as well, you know, again, I personally don't really like all this, you know, let's just discuss, let's just educate. I think it needs to come from a place of action. So maybe companies going out of their way to create reports as well, or even share reports that are already around about diversity and inclusion and where it's worked in maybe other areas of different industries that might not be insurance, and how we can adopt and foster that too.
I think that's spot on, Shireen and Pauline. I think you both touched on a key issue here is that, you know, we flood everyone with all this information and, you know, ask them to go out and absorb all this information on their plate. But ultimately, the way that they absorb that comes down to their own unconscious biases and their own level of emotional intelligence. So it all plays hand in hand. On that note, given your
one observation though,
absolutely,
and I agree with everything Shireen has said, but I would also encourage firms not to only focus at the graduate and apprenticeship level, because there is a long track record of focusing at the junior end, not shifting the culture, and then they still leave. So, and there is a constant theme where people think that actually, in order to address the race dialogue, we haven't got the talent, so we're going to have to build the talent, so we'll start at the junior end. Well, in 20 years' time, if they're not there, if they haven't moved up to senior level roles, then we still haven't afforded it, and we'll still be saying the same thing. So it's really important that we consider where we can create opportunities at the experienced hire. And it may not be, granted, in some of the core frontline positions, but there are lots of opportunities. And that isn't to say that we should only focus on putting ethnic minorities in back office roles. That is not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that if we can bring experienced hires in, as well as develop talent, we'll be, from the junior end, we'll be in a much better position. So just wanted to add that point in.
Great, thanks for that, Pauline. And then also, if we can hear from Isla, given your background, having studied psychology, how can individuals become more aware of their own inherent biases?
That was a long time ago. I think it's hard. I think it's very difficult. I think it's a much easier conversation when people are very open to challenging themselves, to recognizing, you know, that door is already open for that conversation and for that learning. Where that door is closed, even if there's a window in that door, it's a much harder thing to push forward. So I think from my perspective, it's making sure that the learning and the education is available from many different angles. You know, one size does not fit all. And the focus is on bringing people into the conversation, and it could be at very different levels. So I think, it's very, very difficult. I think that, you know, I completely hear, you know, Shireen, what you're saying about the actions, the need to focus on action. I completely agree with that. But trying to work in parallel with bringing people along in the conversation, I think can be very, very helpful. And a key thing that I've seen work very well in the industry is an increasing contingent who feel strong enough to challenge. to bring these, day-to-day examples to the table and make people think twice on these things. And then that it makes people much more open, hopefully, to the conversation.
Great, thank you for that, Isla. Now, we all know that one of the key components to building ethnic diversity is to, first of all, capture accurate and correct data and metrics. So we also know that one of the key metrics that companies are gearing towards is their ethnicity pay gap. So James, I know you've been doing some great work with data capture. If we can come to you initially on what is the importance of capturing this ethnicity data and how can it bring about change?
Yeah, well, I'm in danger of being branded a data guru, which I'm definitely not. But we've been doing lots of work about it recently. So last year, our data was pretty poor. It just wasn't there. We had gender data, but not much else. So over the last couple of months, we've been spending a lot of time, collecting data, and it is interesting to see the response you get from employees when it's the first time you've asked for it, and there's a lot of nervousness. There's a lot of nervousness about why you're collecting it, what you're going to do with it. This is personal information to me. Why do you need to know? So it's about kind of getting people on that journey. And we're still not there yet. We're still not 100% completion, but we're getting there with ethnicity data. It's about having the conversation, about reassuring people that it's absolutely confidential. We're actually not interested in you as an individual. We're interested in the collective. And once we know the collective, then we can identify where our gaps are. If we don't have the data, obviously we can't drive plans in the right direction that are going to drive some change. And for me, it's not just about having the data of the makeup of your organization. It's then being able to do stuff with it. So when you look at your performance ratings each year, or when you look at your bonuses, or how many people you're hiring, who's leaving the organization, once you've got that data, you can start to analyze the diversity makeup of all those key people processes and help you understand, is there unconscious bias at play, or is there a certain group that is disadvantaged? And by having this data, and as I said, it's not completely complete, but for the first time, going through the kind of reward phase here at TMK and performance ratings, we've been able to analyze that against gender and ethnicity. It's been really, really interesting and really good to see, we haven't got inherent bias play in these areas. So it's hard, and you have to get people on the journey, but it's really worth it, and it really helps you develop the plans.
Yeah, it's important because it hasn't been done in the past, so it has to, we have to start somewhere. And the fact that you're doing all this work, and the industry is starting to wake up to the importance of capturing accurate data is encouraging. And off the back of that, what has been your experience thus far with collecting and understanding that ethnic data in the first place?
So we anecdotally knew that we had gaps in senior management and management levels when it came to ethnicity, but having an anecdotal knowledge of that isn't enough. You need to have the data to back that up. And then once we've collected it, we can see that we're pretty underrepresented when it comes to mid-manager roles and senior manager roles. So my challenge for that is that where are the role models? Where are the role models for the people that we're hiring into the junior level roles, to see that there's someone who they can aspire to be in the future. So it's really important now that we now focus on the development of diverse talent with leadership potential within the business, and we focus on hiring diverse talent into more senior roles at the same time.
Yeah, I think it's important. I mean, obviously, it's you see somebody that looks like you in a role that you want to achieve at some point in your career is important for your own motivation and confidence, professional confidence, and in day-to-day interactions. So I think you hit the nail right on the head there. And then if we could come to Pauline on why do you think ethnic minorities are more reluctant to declare their ethnicity, and what can be done to overturn this? James touched on potential nervousness, but what are your thoughts on that?
I think certainly, that we all know you've got to be very clear about what you're going to do with the data. So what are you going to do with the data? Who has access to my data? Why do you want to do it? And how are you going to report on what you've done against the data? Those are all some very simple, basic questions. You know, I don't want to put my head above the parapet because I'm Black and I've got this far without actually having to say I'm Black. So why should I give you my data now? There's another challenge. Or actually, for colleagues who are not of an ethnic minority background, the other side is also true. Hey, it's, you know, Turkey's voting for Christmas. Not really sure I want that either. So I think you've got this real mass challenge. And for me, I would suggest that organisations should be thinking about how it benefits their colleagues. So if you are collecting data, it shouldn't just be around one particular demographic because you're trying to look at that demographic, but you want to do it more broadly across all of the different, as much information as you can ask your colleagues to share with you that will help you create the right environment and workspace for them. So if it's looking at dyslexia, for example, in order to provide better tech, to be able to help them on their laptop, you know, with laptops or IT support, for example. There are standard packages you can put on on computers to help everybody, but also can be very valuable if you knew you had a large number of people with dyslexia. Exactly the same when you think about, you know, whether you're considering your family care policies, and whether or not you consider those that have care responsibilities, childcare or elder care or adult care, and do we need to increase our emergency days? Do we need to think about how we support primary and secondary carers, not just supporting mums? So there are, you know, so there are lots of different ways that you can talk about data that can be beneficial to everyone. So I think that's just a really key point in terms of why you're collecting the data and how is it going, what's in it for me? That's what you've really got to do.
What it comes down to.
Yeah, it's what it comes down to for every single person.
Absolutely. I really appreciate all of your genuine, candid insight. We'll now open the floor for any questions from the audience. Let's see what we have thus far in the chat. So this first one, how can firms implement the learnings from Lloyd's latest culture survey into their D&I strategy?
Well,
whoever wants to go.
I mean, I'll certainly just offer the comment that I think it's important, you know, consider the culture survey points. So some firms will have access to their own direct data, others will be looking across the culture survey responses, and we'll have more data responses coming out later in the year. I would look at those data responses and ask yourselves the question. So if you look at our dashboard now, for example, there will be the question, is culture included on your risk agenda, and what number of firms have that? How many firms, what's the data disclosure rate looking like for firms? In addition, on the Lloyds.com website, under the culture section, you'll find a maturity checklist around D&I specifically that you can download and look at whether you're in the developing stage of diversity and inclusion or whether you're in the high performing stage. And there are a range of checklists that can help you shape and form your opinion and thoughts for your own firm.
Thanks for that. This next one says, hi guys, do you think there is an issue with code switching within the market, i.e. code switching meaning when an individual alters the way that they speak in order to try and fit in better?
That's fascinating, isn't it? You know, and yeah, part of the culture that we're trying to create is bringing your whole self to work, you know, and if you're feeling that you cannot be your whole self in your environment, you need to question yourself, you know, is this the right place for me? Yeah, I'm really fascinated by that.
There's about 15 years or so ago now, Dr. Kenji Yoshino talked about the concept of covering. And effectively this code switching is very much about covering, and again it goes back to the cultural aspects. Why would I want to cover my appearance, or why would I, you know, another option, why would I want to cover who I'm affiliated with, who I'm associated with, because I don't want to be branded as the angry black woman, so I therefore avoid all the other black women, and there aren't that many of us in the market, so that's a real, you know, that's going to be a challenge if I'm going to avoid everyone that's there. But how do I make sure that those areas, and it's about being aware of them, and let's be clear, this isn't just about you know, people that identify as LGBT and are not open. This is not, it is not a, you know, this is just for those that are black or otherwise. There are white people that are straight and that also cover. political, Christian, political, religious beliefs. So there's lots of covering that goes underway, and we have to understand, is it because we're not transparent as an organisation, welcoming and accepting, or are there hidden messages that we are putting out there, either leaders or in the way that we have designed our building, or the access to, quiet spaces to meditate, for example. What are the messages that we're putting out there that prevents people from being themselves, and, as Jane says, bringing their whole self to work?
I think that's great. We have time for a few more here. So we have, how do you feel about firms sharing D&I stats, and is that a good thing?
I'm going to let Isla answer that one, because Isla and James can answer that.
I think it's a very good thing to share the stats. There's obviously the statistics that we're obliged to share, gender pay gap and things like that, but having it as part of a larger conversation, I think, is a very positive thing. It helps with transparency, it helps with the conversation. So yeah, I think it's a good thing. I think we've got a ways to go in the industry to get all the parties in the industry comfortable to do that. But I think we're on that journey.
Thanks for that, Isla. Yeah, I think it's important to have fluid transfer of this D&I data. It shouldn't be proprietary strategy in this realm. We should get to a point where this is something that's frequently collaborated on across multiple entities in order to actually see the change that we're here to discuss. So we have time for one more question, and let's go for this one here. So she says, hello, firstly, thank the ACIN, the speakers for this event. I want to join the insurance industry. As a Black woman, I feel like passing the first stages of recruitment is becoming impossible due to lack of diversity. And I feel like I have limited work experience because I graduated in 2020. Entry-level jobs still want experience, and the pandemic has limited that opportunity. So how do you get in the industry? How do you get the industry to give you a chance?
You know what, it's really, really tough right now, because a lot of firms have cut back on hiring, more entry-level talent, because the working from home situation has meant that a lot of organizations cannot provide the kind of support and training needed for people to kickstart their careers. And my heart goes out to people who are starting their careers in this current time, because it's really tough. And I'm hoping the situation will change over the next few months as we go back to the office. We run a graduate program. We are open for applications very shortly, actually. So look out for TMK. We did hire graduates last year, and we will hire graduates again in the autumn of this year. And we hire internships as well. So keep going through the recruitment process. Challenge and ask for feedback on your applications if you're not hearing anything, because organizations should give that to you, and try and use any networks that you can, whether you meet people or whether you have friends or colleagues or family members who know people. Try and use your network as much as you can to try and support your position.
Great.
I just wanted to if possible, Keith, I just wanted to add on to what Jane said about.
Feel free.
Yeah. So what works for myself was that I used LinkedIn like very, very well. So search the companies you're interested in, or the people that do the role that you're interested in, and reach out to them on LinkedIn. Something that worked really well was saying, if your company has any events, do you mind if I join? If I can, log in and join? And I'm sure that that's possible and that's free, but it's a good way for you to gain insight into the business, what they're doing. Maybe the event might be on, for example, something like this, or it might be about the future of insurance. It could be anything. And again, that's a way of you actually building your knowledge of what's happening in present time within the insurance industry. And if you write down enough note taking, you can use that in the future when you do write your cover letters, or even when you're creating your CV. Again, follow as many people as you can from the insurance industry on LinkedIn as well. There might be some free insurance courses, or maybe insight days. So a lot of companies do insight days that are completely free. You can come in, you can get to speak to people who work in the industry, find out what an underwriter is, find out what a broker is. You know, it's all about doing that real grafting of what people might not be doing. You know, most people will probably apply with their CV and cover letter, but what are people not doing that's going to make them stand out is what you need to be really thinking about.
Great, thanks for that, Shireen. And we actually have time for a few more questions. I love the level of engagement that we have from the audience here today. Shows that you were paying attention, which is a good thing. So do you think D&I needs a complete rethink in the market? Too many companies have silted groups, gender equality, LGBTQ, culture, et cetera, rather than looking at intersectionality. For example, the experience of Black women will be completely different from non-Black women. And this actually ties into another question that we have in the chat, being under Lloyd's initiatives, is there scope to address intersectionality when training C-suite or hiring managers and teams?
So if I'll kick off, and maybe the others will kick in as well. So I think, first of all, I think, you know, we absolutely do need to consider intersectionality, but intersectionality is so broad, it is very difficult to then really galvanise and encourage people to come together. And in essence, when you think about where resource groups came from, it was about people coming together, both not just as a collective group because we're the same, but from a support perspective, and then also to be able to build a network with others that are interested or like-minded in that particular area. So, you know, in some ways, just because the resource groups are there, those grassroots efforts, that shouldn't stop organisations saying, okay, great, we've got more Black people. Hang on, are they all Black men? Or are they, you know, or actually, great, we're going to look at Asian populations. Well, it's very different when you talk about Indian versus Bangladeshi, for example, versus Chinese, and as an example. So you do have to look at the different elements and the different intersections of your data, but at some point it will become too small, too narrow to be able to really address all of the issues for every intersectional type. So I think there is an element, this is the start point, it shouldn't be the end. And to the point of training leaders, I think you absolutely have to make them aware that one experience isn't the same, that all Black people's experience isn't equal. And that there will be a difference, and that I, as a Black Caribbean woman, will have a very different experience to that of a Black African woman. There will be very different backgrounds, and actually even in that realm it will be very different again. So you know, the differences in our upbringings will be different. There will be some differences, and we've got to alert our senior leaders that you can't just brush everyone with the same colour paint and expect that, you know, I've learned it, I've understood it, I'm informed, I'm woke. I learned how to use that in the right context. I now feel like I'm in the intergenerational.
Yeah, well, speaking from a you know, marginal millennial / Generation Z, I think that was spot on. So yeah, well done there. Lastly, if I could ask each panelist individually, what role do they think D&I plays in the future of the insurance industry? We could start with Isla.
I think it's a huge part of the future of the industry. I think I would love to get to a stage where, you know, ID initiatives, ID staffing, ID is not something separate and distinct. It's just part of who organizations are and part of who the industry is. You know, it's embedded in there. Everything is viewed at, bearing in mind and taking that into consideration. So I think it's a huge part. I think we're evolving. I think we're all part of the journey. And as long as we're learning as we go along, I think I'm hopeful.
Great. Thanks for that, Isla. James, would you also like to follow up?
Yeah, to build on that, I'd like to see a future where you don't really need to talk about setting the inclusion and diversity strategy, you know, because there's no need for it, because naturally the culture of the business is inclusive, and you can employ anyone from any background, no matter who they are, and they can feel instantly like they belong. And I think we're quite a long way off that, but I think it's achievable. You know, as we go through kind of the next generation, you know, millennials are all looking for, you know, firms' approach and commitment to inclusion and diversity when they're applying for jobs. So, you know, we will get there, because the firms that don't focus on it will end up not employing the right people. So we will get there. It will just take some time.
Great. Thanks for that, James. And Shireen, would you also like to add some input?
Yeah, sure. So for me, I think that the insurance industry needs to be receptive to innovation in order to grow. And innovation doesn't just come from one area of the business, and that's the way that we should look at people. It can't just come from one type of business and one type of person. So we have to be thinking about diversity being the very foundation of the future of insurance, and making sure that we're all diverse, not only in thought, but in gender, generation, and race, and all the other ways too.
Great. Thanks for that, Shireen. And we can close with Pauline's comments as well.
Yeah, so sorry, I was sitting back and listening to all of those and think they're all great points. I think I actually believe, and having been in D&I for more years than I can count, I did start out by thinking that, my job is done when it's no longer needed. I've refrained that, revised that now, and actually, just because we all know how to budget doesn't mean we don't need finance. So I sort of feel that actually there is a need to continue to invest in how we focus on our people. And I think from an insurance sector perspective, I think we have the opportunity. We're a great industry, and we don't talk about it enough. And we have the opportunity to A, make the change, and B, to talk about it so that we are equal to those other parts of the financial services sector that are exciting and interesting. And I came out of banking, so I really do know how desperately hard people try to get into investment banking, because hey, it's the sexier end of the financial services and the part of the sexier end of banking. But actually, this is a great industry, and we've got to shout loudly and proudly about it. But we've also got to be committed to making the change, because if we shout about it and we get it wrong, that is not going to be a great place for us to be.
It's true. I think you all make very compelling points there, and just to piggyback off of that last one, just I studied finance and international business during my undergrad, and so I had every intention of going into investment banking. But I have family from Bermuda, so it's impossible not to hear about the industry via just chatting at the beach or anything like that. But I wanted to do something a bit different at the end of the day. And my experience in the industry has been eye-opening in regards to how diverse it can be, but also how fulfilling it can be in what we provide for society as well. So I think we need to do a better job of promoting ourselves at the undergraduate level, but also as you all mentioned several times throughout this discussion, bringing in those role models in more senior roles in order to serve as as momentum and motivation for these younger junior members that will be joining. So with that said, we've had immense level of engagement from the audience, so I appreciate all of your engagement. We now conclude the panel. I'd like to thank all of our lovely panelists again for taking the time out of their evenings to share their perspectives. So thank you all, and also the audience for joining us today. I'll now pass along to the two gentlemen that make all of this possible, co-founders of the ACIN, Godwin Sosi and Junior Garba, for a update of the network and some closing remarks. So gentlemen, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Keith, and thank you all the panelists, and thank you everybody that attended today. It was a very intriguing conversation, and I think it's not limited to where we are at present, but more so around what are we doing along the journey to ensure that diversity and inclusion remains very much a part of our future as well. So I'm sure your leverage, your knowledge has all been leveraged very much, and the conversations don't stop here. But just to kind of give you a little bit of an update about what the African Caribbean Insurance Network has been doing over the last 2 years. Actually, this week does actually mark 2 years since we've been established, and it's been an interesting journey. When we first kind of set out with the ACIN, our vision and our mission was always meant to kind of change the landscape of diversity and inclusion within the insurance sector. And although we're not where we want to be yet, it is a work in progress, and we're starting to see change along the way. And so I'm just going to kind of go through a few of our accomplishments over the 2 years. We've attended 40 different careers fairs, and that ties in very much, with attracting the workforce of the future into the industry. This is 40 universities that never knew about insurance, and And these are all potential students now that are, considering insurance as a potential industry to come into. We've had over 2,000 students sign up to our network, some who have been placed within the industry. We've done 2 research papers, talking about, off the back of the George Floyd incident that happened last year, and what steps companies can take to become more racially inclusive. So, really kind of having these conversations within, the industry, and ensuring that people are also part of the conversations as well. We have 500 existing, professionals in our network. Pre-COVID, we're able to have events, see each other face to face, but it has been a lot of web time, unfortunately. But hopefully, fingers crossed, we should be able to meet again. We've had what's been very, very close to us, 30 job placements, in the industry, and that's been a massive achievement for us. These are all kids, like us, who wanted to be investment bankers. Let's be honest, where everyone, if you tell your parents you're going into insurance, I think the first question they ask is, what is that and why are you going into this industry? But, it has been very, very rewarding. It has been very, very promising. And we wanted to kind of share, the potential careers that kids could undertake in this industry with them, and use ourselves ideally as a role model for them. So when we're attending these careers fairs, when we're talking to them, helping them with interview prep, seeing like-minded people just like themselves gives them that confidence to be able to kind of say, I also want to come into this industry as well. Last year, August, we launched our ACIN Recruit, which was the diverse recruitment arm of the ACIN to help, diversify the talent that we bring into the industry. We know traditionally, a lot of, candidates tend to go to your traditional recruitment companies for diverse talent, but the harsh reality is that you're not going to find any diverse candidates there, because many diverse candidates don't know about the traditional recruitment company. So we utilize the mobile network that we have of students, and we said, if you're looking for diverse talent, you can come through the ACIN Recruit, and that was what helped to fuel our 30 jobs placements. And last but not least, 2020 Diversity and Inclusion Award winners of the year last year was a massive achievement for us. It really showed us that all the work that we're doing is being recognized within the industry, and not just being recognized, but people are also a part of the vision and are brought into the vision. I've had numerous amounts of conversations with Pauline, Isla, James, Sher, Keith, all of them. And I'm sure they're probably all fed up with me, but we talk about these on a day-to-day basis about how we can advance the dialogue around diversity and inclusion, and the changes that we can make within the industry. So in a nutshell, it's been a busy 2 years, but it's only the beginning. And we very much look forward to everyone else, joining the network and helping us to achieve, our future goals as well. So I'll pass on to Junior now, who's going to give you guys more of an update as well.
Yeah, hey guys, and I'm just going to keep it short and sweet because I'm conscious of time here. But yeah, wow, what an amazing panel. Thanks to all the panelists for your amazing contributions. And yeah, Gordon's provided an update of what we've been up to for the last couple of years. But yeah, just wanted to make some comments around some of the observations that we've seen over the last couple of years, especially over the last kind of 6 to 9 months, kind of following the George Floyd events. We've noticed some interesting trends in the market. And one of the main things that we have seen is that a lot of companies in the market are now beginning to implement ethnic diversity strategies, recognizing ethnic diversity as its own independent work stream within D&I, which is amazing. A lot of those strategies tend to be 3-pillared. The first point being around learning and development, the second point being around recruitment, and the third point being around culture. We've also seen that a lot of companies have now, for the first time, begun to implement employee resource groups as well, which is amazing. More companies using diverse recruiters, and some companies even going as far as dropping recruitment agencies that are not meeting diversity standards. So, we're really pleased about that. And I suppose going forward, there's lots more that we've got planned. The ACIN Recruit continues to grow, providing an end-to-end recruitment service, in the entry-level areas, graduate recruitment areas, and some suitable experienced hire roles as well. So if you are a HR professional on this call, and you are looking to build more of a diverse pipeline of talent into your organization, then do please be in touch. And we're really, really impressed with the amount of awareness that's been raised amongst students about the insurance sector. We now have candidates turning down offers at Goldman Sachs and City Investment Bank saying, we want to come and work for an underwriting company. We want to come and work for a broking company. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. More research, expect to see a lot more of that. We have built an established research and study function, which includes academics, D&I experts, insurance historians, plus many more. So expect to see some great research coming out over the next few months. And yeah, more events, many more events like this for our members, both insurance professionals and students as well. So I'm not going to take up too much of your time because I know it's getting quite late now, but thanks to everybody for attending. If you're not a member of the ACIN yet, please register on our website. And if you are if you're a company looking for some support in implementing your ethnic D&I strategies, we'll be able to support you in that as well. So please do be in touch. Everybody have a lovely evening. And yeah, thanks to all the panelists again. Take care.